Before we begin, viewer discretion is advised. This is entertainment. What follows asks one question. What happens when one of Hollywood's most admired man who has faced battles few can imagine, who has shown more grace under pressure than anyone should be expected, to walks into what should have been a celebratory interview, only to be met with an unexpected ambush? When someone who has spent decades helping others suddenly finds himself accused of exploitation on national television, when kindness collides with cruelty, dignity confronts and a figure cherished by millions reaches a breaking point no one thought he had. You're about to see the moment Michael J. Fox, the icon. The man who transformed personal hardship into global hope discovers that even his extraordinary patience has limits. This isn't a typical interview gone wrong. This is the moment Joy Behar learned the cost of mistaking gentleness for weakness and compassion for an easy target. This is when one of America's most gracious stars finally said enough. What follows is nothing less than dramatic. The eruption, the pointed truths, the walk-off that stunned the studio and left a host realizing far too late the magnitude of her misstep. Here is Michael J. Fox, as you've never seen him. Composed, dignified, yet unmistakably done. The View expected the usual ratings bump from a beloved guest. Instead, they witnessed a masterclass in how truth, delivered with precision and conviction, can dismantle a false narrative in real time. Boucle up. This confrontation doesn't just mark a moment in television. It's a reconsideration of what happens when a good man is pushed too far. The stage had been carefully prepared for what producers envisioned as a warm, uplifting segment, the kind that generates applause, breaks, and positive online chatter. Michael Houghton Fox, known to generations from Back to the Future and Family Ties, was scheduled to discuss his advocacy work, the breakthrough research his foundation was supporting, and his upcoming projects. Producers orchestrated every detail. Soft lighting to flatter their esteemed guest, comfortable seating for an intimate tone, and camera angles designed to capture the collective admiration felt for him. The studio buzzed with genuine excitement before airtime. The audience screened and seated chatted with enthusiasm, sharing beloved memories, favorite roles, and stories of his resilience in the face of Parkinson's disease. Event crew, usually unfazed by celebrities' visits, seemed sincerely thrilled. Camera operators double-checked their setups, sound engineers rebalanced audio levels, and producers reviewed notes to ensure every question supported the positive tone they intended. The co-hosts prepared accordingly. Whoopi Goldberg reviewed key accomplishments of Michael's foundation. Sunny Hosteen read articles about promising Parkinson's research and planned questions that would highlight his optimism. Sarah N. collected heartwarming stories from individuals whose lives had been touched by the foundation. And then there was Joy Behar. While her colleagues prepared to celebrate their guest, Joy carried a noticeably different energy. Something in her posture, her intense review of notes, hinted at trouble. She had been unusually quiet in the pre-show meeting, offering only perfunctory nods as producers outlined the intended tone. Had anyone been watching closely, they might have noticed a slight, calculated smile forming at the corners of her mouth. Unbeknownst to the team, Joy had her own plan. She'd prepared questions unrelated to the approved script, questions designed to provoke rather than illuminate. She had convinced herself she would create a moment, one that would make headlines and showcase her willingness to ask tough questions, even of beloved figures. She had no idea what she was about to set in motion. When Michael stepped through the studio doors, the audience erupted in thunderous, heartfelt applause, not the polite, expected welcome of daytime TV, but the kind reserved for someone deeply People stood, some wiped away tears. The ovation stretched on, long enough to feel like minutes. Michael greeted them with his familiar, warm smile, one that had charmed audiences for decades, now lined with the traces of battles most could never fathom. He moved with care, Parkinson's shaping his gait, but never diminishing his dignity. Each step radiated the resilience forged through years of private struggle. The other hosts rose to greet him. Whoopi embraced him warmly. Sarah took his hand, her admiration obvious. Sunny welcomed him with genuine enthusiasm, her professionalism giving way to visible excitement. But Joy Behar remained seated. While the others greeted him with warmth, Joy's expression stayed cool, her eyes sharp and calculating. She offered only a curt nod and a smile that didn't reach her eyes before returning to her notes, as though his arrival were routine rather than remarkable. Anyone who knew what was coming might have recognized the moment for what it was. What followed felt less like casual conversation and more like a predator, settling into position still, watchful, waiting for an opening. But Michael, gracious and unsuspecting, settled comfortably into his chair with a warmth that had endeared him to millions. Michael, welcome back to The View, Whoopi said brightly, her genuine enthusiasm lighting up the set. It's always a pleasure to have you here. You look fantastic. Thank you for having me, Michael replied, his familiar voice instantly transporting the audience through decades of beloved roles. It's great to be back with all of you. The interview began with easy rapport. Sunny asked about his recent work with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and Michael's face immediately brightened as he described the progress in Parkinson's research. His passion was unmistakable, rooted, not in wishful thinking but in real data, real advancements, real hope. The science has evolved so much in the past few years, he said, his optimism grounded and sincere. We're seeing promising results in clinical trials. I'm confident major breakthroughs are coming within the next decade. Sarah leaned forward, clearly moved. Your foundation has raised over $1 billion for research. How does it feel to know you've created such an impact? Michael accepted the praise with humility. It's not about me. It's about the researchers, donors, and advocates who make this work possible. I'm just grateful to be part of it. The audience murmured with appreciation. The atmosphere was warm, uplifting, exactly what producers had planned. Then Joy leaned in. Well, Michael, she began, her tone suddenly sharp enough to slice through the room's comfort. Let's talk about something else. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Whoopi's eyebrows rose, a silent signal that Joy was veering off the agreed path. Sunny shifted in her chair. Sarah's smile faded into confusion. Michael remained polite, though a subtle tension appeared in his posture. Slight tightening of the shoulders. The careful control of someone used to handling difficult moments. I'm not sure what you mean, Joy sighed calmly. I try to stay focused on health advocacy rather than politics. Joy pressed on. Oh, come on, Michael, she said with a dismissive wave. You've been vocal about certain issues. Some people say you use your condition to push a political agenda. The studio fell almost silent. Moments ago, the audience had been energized. Now they seemed to sense something had shifted into uncomfortable territory. Whoopi looked ready to intervene, but Joy continued before anyone could redirect her. Let's be honest, she insisted, leaning further into the confrontation. You've received a lot of sympathy over the years, and some critics claim you've used that sympathy to gain political influence. Michael's jaw tightened, barely noticeable, but real. His hands tensed on the arms of his chair, though he kept his composure with the steadiness of someone who had weathered far harsher storms. Joy, I think you're misrepresenting my advocacy, he responded, his voice still controlled but now edged with firmness. When I speak about healthcare or research funding, it's because these issues affect millions, not just me. Joy didn't relent. But you have to admit, she countered, that your celebrity and your condition give you a platform others don't have. And you've used that platform to support causes not everyone agrees with. At the table, discomfort was unmistakable. Sarah fidgeted, desperate for an escape. Sunny stared down at her notes, searching for a lifeline. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. Whoopi finally stepped in, her voice carrying the grounding authority of the show's moderator. "Joy, maybe we should stay focused on Michael's foundation work," she suggested gently, offering a lifeline to both her guest and her co-host. But Joy brushed it aside, fueled by what she seemed to believe was journalistic bravery, unwilling to see that it had crossed into ambush territory. "No, Whoopi, I think this is important," she insisted, dismissing the intervention with a flick of her hand. "Michael, you've appeared in political ads. You've spoken out on healthcare. You can't hide behind your foundation when it's convenient." Hairline cracks began to show in Michael's famous composure. He kept his voice steady, but a new steel threaded through it, subtle, unmistakable, and ignored at Joy's peril. "I'm not hiding behind anything," he said, each word deliberate. "I'm using my voice to advocate for medical research and access to care. If that's controversial to you, then we have very different priorities." "What I find controversial," Joey shot back, missing every warning sign that she was pushing a fundamentally decent man toward the edge, "is when celebrities think their personal struggles give them special authority in shaping public policy. You're an actor, Michael not a policy expert." The studio grew unnervingly still. The audience stopped reacting. Even the camera operators looked unsure keep filming, or somehow halt the collision unfolding in front of them. Michael clasped his hands together tightly, clearly processing the attack, calculating how to answer something that veered far beyond disagreement and into the personal. "Joy," he said slowly, the edge in his voice slicing through the room. "I've lived with Parkinson's for over 30 years. I've worked with researchers, doctors, and policymakers globally. I think that gives me at least some insight." Joy leaned in, mistaking his restraint for weakness. "And that's exactly my point," she said triumphantly. "Astukse scored a debate win rather than taking a needless swing. You've turned your personal situation into a career. Some people might call that exploitation." That was the moment everything changed. The polite smile Michael had worn throughout 4 decades of public life vanished. His eyes flashed with a rare anger. His posture shifted from gracious guest to someone who had finally reached the line he would not allow to be crossed. "Exploitation," Michael repeated, his voice dropping to a quiet razor-sharp register, far more powerful than shouting. "Joy, you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting." The other hosts stiffened, now fully alarmed. Whoopi braced herself against the desk, as if ready to intervene physically. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear. Sunny stared ahead, unable to believe the moment was real. But Joy, misreading the storm gathering in front of her, pushed even further. "I'm just saying what a lot of people think," she insisted, giving a dismissive wave that would replay endlessly in viewers' minds. "You've built an entire second career around being sick. The foundation, the speeches, the endorsements, it all ties back to your condition." Michael's hand steady throughout the interview, despite the tremors Parkinson's can bring closed into fists. The composure he'd maintained for decades was being tested in a way few things ever had. "My foundation has funded research that helps millions," he said, his voice trembling with controlled emotion. "If you think that is exploitation, then you don't understand what we're trying to do." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Joy replied, unaware of the disaster she was creating. "You've crafted this saint-like image, brave, celebrity fighting disease, and no one is allowed to question it because you're ill. It's brilliant marketing, really." The audience gasped in, audible, collective shock. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The mood shifted to outright disapproval. Even Joy's loyal viewers were recoiling. The damage was unfolding live, undeniable. Still, she pressed on. "And those political ads?" she continued, relentless, standing there, shaking, making people feel sorry so they'll vote a certain way. Some might call that emotional manipulation. Michael stood up. The sudden movement startled the entire studio. His chair rolled back sharply, the sound echoing through the silence. For a long, suspended moment, nothing existed but the faint hum of equipment and the presence of a man who had finally been pushed beyond his breaking point. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of decades spent under scrutiny. And decades spent fighting a disease with courage most couldn't fathom. Joy, I came here to talk about hope, about research, about the future we're trying to build for people who are suffering, and you've turned it into something ugly. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. It didn't need to. The quiet force behind Michael's words was far more devastating than any shouted response could have been, sharper and far more effective. Yet Joy, astonishingly unaware of the weight of the moment she'd created, pressed on as the entire studio held its breath. I'm just asking the tough questions other interviewers won't ask, says Saeed, still convinced she was practicing journalism rather than cruelty. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to be? Journalism. Michael let out a short, bitter laugh, humorless and sharp. This isn't journalism, Joy. This is performance. You're trying to manufacture a moment at my expense. And frankly, it's disgusting. Whoopi finally tried again, desperate to pull the show out of the nosedive. Michael, please. Let's just take a step back. No, Whoopi. He cut her off gently, with respect, making it clear she wasn't the one he had a problem with. I appreciate you trying to mediate, but Joy needs to hear this. He turned back to Joy. You want to talk about exploitation? Fine. Let's talk about a host who thinks attacking a guest with a chronic illness makes for good television. Color rushed into Joy's face. Her pride rose faster than any sense of caution. I'm not attacking you because you're sick, Michael. I'm questioning your methods. My motives. His voice cracked not with anger, but with genuine hurt breaking through the control. My motive is to help find a cure for a disease that affects more than 10 million people. My motive is to give hope to families watching their loved ones decline. So tell me, Joy, what are your motives here? The question hung in the air like a blade. Everyone in the studio knew there was no good answer. Joy shifted in her seat, perhaps beginning to realize she'd gone far beyond acceptable, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. My motive is to have an honest conversation, she insisted, though her voice had lost the confidence it carried earlier, without the usual celebrity worship. Celebrity worship. Michael shook his head, stunned. Joy, I've been transparent about my condition for 30 years. I've shared my worst moments so people could understand what this disease actually looks like. And you call that exploitation? Sarah attempted to rescue the moment with a soft, apologetic voice. Michael, we all respect everything you've done, Dio, Sarah. His tone softened toward Herbie, because he knew she wasn't responsible. But your colleague here just implied I've built a career on being sick, that I manipulate emotions for political gain. Is that the respect we're talking about? Joy jumped back in, unable to let silence expose her. I never said you built your career on being sick. You were already famous when you were diagnosed. Then what are you saying? Joy. Michael turned fully toward her, his presence now commanding the entire studio. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're implying that everything I've done since my diagnosis is somehow dishonest, or I'm saying you've used your platform for more than medical advocacy, Joy replied, desperately clinging to an intellectual high ground that was vanishing beneath her. You've endorsed candidates. You've taken positions on issues unrelated to Parkinson's. Michael moved a step closer, not threatening, but unmistakably authoritative. So what you're really upset about is that you disagree with my politics. This isn't journalism. This isn't accountability. This is silencing a voice you don't like. That's not true, Joy protested weakly. Her voice betrayed her. Isn't it? Michael pressed, his tone now that of a lawyer laying out a case before a jury already convinced. Because if you'd done any research, you'd know our foundation operates with complete transparency. You'd know our studies are peer-reviewed, publicly available, and meticulously reported. Joy opened her mouth, but he kept going, the words billing with the force of years of dedication. But you didn't do the homework. You chose an ambush instead. You thought you could score points by attacking someone with a chronic illness on national television. The studio was so still the cameras picked up every subtle sound. The emotion in Michael's voice, the shifting of uncomfortable audience members. I whispered, "Oh my God." From backstage, you know what the real tragedy is? Michael continued. his voice now filled with decades of passion and frustration. There are researchers working 18-hour days, trying to unlock the mysteries of neurodegenerative diseases. There are families who need hope, who need to know someone is fighting for them. And instead of using this platform to help, you chose to tear down the efforts that might one day save lives. Joy's defensive posture finally started to crumble. For the first time, she seemed to sense the enormity of the mistake she'd made. "Michael, I think maybe we should," she began quietly. "No, Joy," Michael cut her off, firm and absolute. "You don't get to walk it back now. You wanted this conversation, so let's have it." "You accused me of exploiting my illness for personal gain," Michael said. "You implied I manipulate people's emotions for political purposes. Those are serious charges, and I think this audience deserves to hear you stand by them or explain them." Joy glanced around the studio, searching for support from her co-hosts, from the crowd, from anywhere. But the atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as excited anticipation for a beloved guest had curdled into tense silence and barely veiled disapproval of Joy's behavior. Some audience members shook their heads. Others stared at her with clear disappointment, even disgust. "I was just trying to ask challenging questions," Joy replied weakly, the fight draining from her voice as she finally understood what she'd done. "Challenging questions," Michael echoed, his voice lifting with controlled indignation, every word landing with precise, devastating weight. "Joy, a challenging question would be asking about specific research protocols or how we allocate funds. A challenging question would be about the ethics of celebrity advocacy and the responsibilities that come with a platform. What you did was launch personal attacks and dress them up as journalism." Whoopi tried once more to pull things back. "Michael, I think what Joy was trying to say." He raised a hand, stopping her respectful but unmistakably firm. "Whoopi, I appreciate your loyalty to your colleague," he said, "but there's no defending what happened here today. Joy made a conscious choice to attack me personally, and she needs to own that." The cameras caught Joy's expression as she struggled for words, an image that would soon become emblematic. A host who finally pushed too far, who mistook grace for weakness, and discovered too late that kindness has limits. The competent, combative persona from the start of the interview was gone. In her place was someone who clearly realized she had catastrophically misjudged the moment, and that this would follow her far longer than any point she'd hoped to make. "I never meant to attack you personally, Joy," Saeed, almost pleading. "But that's exactly what you did," Michael replied without hesitation. "You questioned my integrity, my intentions, and my character. You suggested my advocacy is built on deception and manipulation. How is that not personal?" Sarah, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke with a note of desperation. "Michael, I think everyone here recognizes the incredible work you've done and the impact you've had." He turned to her with a sad, gentle smile, softening because he knew she hadn't orchestrated this. "I appreciate that, Sarah. But the damage is done. Your show just broadcast to millions. The idea that my life's work might be fraudulent or something. How do you think that affects the families who rely on our work, the donors who support our research?" His words settled over the room like a heavy curtain. For the first time, Joy seemed to truly grasp how far the consequences extended beyond the segment itself. "I didn't think about it that way," she admitted quietly. "That's the problem, Joy," Michael said, his voice carrying both anger and deep disappointment. "You didn't think. You saw a chance to stir controversy, to grab headlines, and you took it without considering the people whose lives depend on the work we're doing." Michael walked back toward his chair, slowly and deliberately, but instead of sitting, he reached for his jacket. The small, simple movement sent a clear message through the studio. This interview was over. His patience was gone. His willingness to play along had ended. "Wait, Michael, you don't have to leave," Whoopi said quickly, genuine concern in her voice. "We still have time in this segment. We can talk about the research, about the foundation." Michael paused as he slipped on his jacket. meeting her eyes with sincere respect and affection that made it clear she wasn't the reason he was walking away. "Whoopi, you've always treated me with grace, and I respect you," he said, "but I can't sit here and pretend what just happened is okay." Then he turned to the audience and to the viewers at home. "To everyone watching," he said, voice strong and steady despite the emotion underneath, "I want you to know that the work we do at the Michael J. Fox Foundation isn't about me. It's about the brilliant scientists dedicating their lives to finding answers. It's about the patients who step into clinical trials, knowing they may not benefit personally, but hoping they can help someone else. It's about the caregivers who give everything to support the people they love." The audience began to clap, tentative at first, then stronger. Within seconds, the applause swelled into a sustained ovation. People rose to their feet. Their message was unmistakable. Support for Michael and condemnation of how he had been treated. The standing ovation grew louder, a rebuke that no scripted line could rival. Joy sat motionless, overwhelmed by the reaction, by the undeniable evidence of how badly she'd misread the situation. The other hosts clapped as well, though their discomfort was written all over their faces in tight smiles and uneasy glances. "The real tragedy," Michael continued over the applause, his words cutting through the noise, "is that we had a chance to talk about hope, about real scientific breakthroughs, about the possibility of a future without Parkinson's. Instead, that time was spent on manufactured controversy." He looked at Joy one last time, his gaze steady. "I've spent 30 years learning how to live with this disease, and the last 25 working to make sure others won't have to. I've been open about my struggles, my victories, and my failures. I've allowed my life to be examined because I believe it serves a greater purpose." Joy finally spoke, her voice no more than a whisper. "Michael, I'm sorry if I offended you." "If," he repeated, shaking his head slowly. "There's no if, Joy. You did offend me. You offended millions of people fighting this disease every day. You offended the researchers working tirelessly for a cure. And you offended the basic principles of respectful conversation." The studio fell silent as he prepared to leave, his words hanging in the air. He took a step toward the exit, then stopped and turned back, one last thought still unspoken. "You know what's really sad?" he asked, his voice filled with disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "I came here excited to share incredible news about recent research. There are trials happening right now that could change everything for people with Parkinson's. New treatments are emerging that could dramatically improve lives." Pause. Pause, letting the weight of that sink in. But instead of talking about that hope, instead of encouraging people to get involved or support the work, we spent our time on this pointless conflict. That's the real loss, not to me, but to the millions of people who needed to hear a message of hope today, without another word, without waiting for a response. Michael J. Fox walked off the set of The View head high, dignity intact. He left behind a stunned studio, a host finally grasping the scale of her mistake, and an audience that kept applauding until he was gone. The cameras kept rolling as Joy sat in silence, unable to look at anyone. The other hosts exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to move forward. The applause faded, replaced by whispers and visible disapproval. By the time the show cut to commercial, the damage was already rippling outward. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation would spread across social media. Within hours, it would dominate trending lists. Within days, Joy Behar would find herself at the center of a firestorm, of her own making, one that would completely overshadow the tough questions she thought she was asking. What began as a standard celebrity interview had become a defining television moment. Michael J. Fox, pushed past the boundaries of his legendary patience, had shown America what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness, when grace under pressure is misread as an inability to push back. He proved that the quietest voice can deliver the most devastating truth, that walking away with your dignity is more powerful than staying to argue, that sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is refusing to play in someone else's ugly game. Was he right to walk off? Should he have stayed and continued the conversation? Those questions missed the point. Joy Behar created a situation in which the only appropriate response was the one Michael chose. Truth spoken plainly, boundaries drawn clearly, and dignity protected completely. The real question isn't whether Michael was too sensitive or Joy too harsh. It's whether we, as a culture, will keep tolerating performative cruelty, dressed up as tough journalism weather. We'll continue rewarding hosts who confuse attack with insight and controversy with courage. Michael J. Fox gave his answer by walking away, and in that simple act, he reminded everyone watching what real strength looks like.